29, exclusive programming for Comcast subscribers.
Hi, welcome to Civil Discourse. This is a program brought to you by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. And my name is Ken Hurley, and welcome back. And I want to ask you, how many of you that view this program or that are participating in political life in the Greater Jacksonville area view themselves as activists? If you think of yourself as an activist, I have a program for you that I'd like to invite you to personally. I would like you to come to see a movie called You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train. This is a movie that is sponsored by an organization that I sit on the board of directors for called Wage Peace. It's the life story of Howard Zinn. And many of you may know Howard Zinn as a historian, an activist, an author of several classics and the bestseller called A People's History of the United States. It's a 78-minute program. Sunday, May 15th at 1 o'clock. The show time is actually at 1:30. We're going to have a brief discussion before it, a brief discussion after it, and no matter what organization you're with or what your issue is, this is a program that is very motivational and very inspirational for anybody who views themselves as an activist, especially in the civil liberties reign. Because sometimes it seems to me that progress in the civil liberties element is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. However, that's inevitably forward progress. So we don't want to equate delay with defeat. So this is a movie, Sunday, May 15th. I'd love for you to be there. You can get more information by looking at the information at the end of this program on the crawl. Today, I would like to discuss on our program, Civil Discourse, what it means to have a constitution. And a guest of mine today is a friend, somebody who teaches constitutional, our Constitution, all sorts of other issues. He's an assistant professor over the University of North Florida. He's in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration. His name is Dr. David Schwam-Baird. Dr. David Schwam-Baird, welcome to Civil Discourse. It's a pleasure for you to be here. And I really want to focus on the Constitution, and because it seems every generation we have to reteach things, and I understand that. I think it's important, but I think we've fallen way behind in what it means to teach our Constitution. And is it in fact a secular document? And why do we have this debate constantly over the millenniums of it's a religious document, it's a Christian nation, Judeo-Christian nation, it's not a Christian nation? How do you teach it?
Well, there's any number of things that I usually say, but the very first thing that you brought up, the fact that every generation we argue about it. I teach a lot of courses on international politics, and one of the issues that you always have is countries are trying to democratize and they have a constitution, and is it going to work, is it not going to work? You also have countries that have constitutions that essentially mean nothing. The Soviet Union had a constitution. You read the Soviet constitution, looks wonderful, didn't mean a thing. It was never used, never invoked, except for as window dressing. And so one of the things that I say is the very fact that we're always arguing and screaming and yelling about the Constitution, is this constitutional? No, it's not. That's actually a sign that we take it seriously, that it's very important and that it matters to us.
That's one of the things the ACLU does and promotes all the time, is more public dialogue, more public speech, more public discourse, put the ideas out there, and if it's an effective method of communication, if you're actually communicating effectively, the goal is reconciliation. Do we agree?
Absolutely.
Do we disagree?
Well, the Constitution itself, when you study how it was put together, the essence of the Constitution is that it is a compromise document. I also tell my students, if anybody ever says to you, the Founding Fathers believed X.
Hear it all the time.
Right.
The original intent.
Well, original intent is a little bit different. I'm talking about, somebody making a speech, somebody, has an agenda pushing it forward. If they say, the Founding Fathers believe X, the first thing that you know is that they don't know what they're talking about, because they disagreed with each other. They disagreed with each other on all sorts of issues.
Oh, you mean collectively lumping all of the Founding Fathers together.
Exactly.
Right.
So you had people like Jefferson, who did not want a strong, centralized national government. You had people like Alexander Hamilton, that wanted exactly that.
Right.
You have people like Jefferson and Madison, who were very, very much in favor of separation of church and state, very active on that issue. You have Patrick Henry, who not only thought there should be an established church, he thought it should be the Anglican Church, the Church of England, or the Episcopalian
Weren't there
Church.
something, how many, do we know exactly how many Founding Fathers there are? Is that a little bit in discussion? Over 50, right? Or
Depends on how you count. If you figure that at the time of the Revolution there were 5 million people and now there's 280 million people, there were a lot of fathers down the line.
Oh, I see. I got you.
But at any rate, it depends on how you count. You can count the people who signed the Declaration of Independence. Or the Constitution.
Right.
And also we had 2 constitutions. The first one didn't work out.
The Articles of Confederation
was our first constitution. And
a lot of people don't realize that.
Oh, that's true. We have had 2 constitutions. But the first one proved unworkable. It created a confederation rather than a federation, which is what we have now. And one of the reasons that it was changed, we almost lost the American Revolution because of that, because Washington spent half of his time fighting the British and half of his time fighting all of the colonial legislatures to give him more stuff, because there was no authority that could say Massachusetts and Georgia and North Carolina have to provide such and such. He had to bargain with each one separately.
And he lost many of his first battles the first year during the Revolution. He was
with the British and with the state legislatures. So, but the Confederation was too loose to really work, to do the job, and that was one of the reasons that there was a second constitutional convention.
So we understand now, looking back, that all the Founding Fathers certainly couldn't agree. So if somebody says, well, the Founding Fathers said this, we know that that's probably suspect at the very least.
It's very suspect.
But we can look at individual Founding Fathers.
We can definitely look at individual Founding Fathers, and the value of doing that is we understand what the terms really meant that were under discussion. You want to understand what separation of church and state means.
Oh, I hear that. Oh, I mean, I'd say I'm very privileged to be invited to go out and speak into public colleges and universities. And lately, in the last, I would say, year, I have some people very vigorously coming up to me, shaking their finger in my face, saying, do you know that that's not even in the Constitution?
Well, it's in the Constitution, and it's in a whole lot of other documents as well. And
I mean, the phrase isn't even in the Constitution.
The phrase is not in the Constitution, but the spirit is in the Constitution, and the language that was used, everybody knew what the language meant. Whether they agreed with it or not, in the end, they knew what it meant. If you look at all of the other documents, all of the other debates, you will see that this is the discussion that was referred to. This is what Jefferson or Madison or Tom Paine meant when they were talking about it.
Well, they had every opportunity to decide that this country could be a theocracy, let's say, or this country could have a national religion. When we look at the First Amendment, for example, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging the free exercise thereof. That's the first 2 clauses that talk about separation of church and state. Not in those words, but because they're counterbalancing principles, you look at it, at least I view it, as government is supposed to be neutral regarding religion, not promote it and not prohibit it.
And that is the understanding. Of course, there was disagreement on that.
That's what I want you to talk to a little bit. What about that disagreement? We're still disagreeing.
Oh, we're still disagreeing about it. But when you look at, for example, Thomas Jefferson himself, since that's really who we're going to be focusing on today, when Thomas Jefferson was president, he got a letter from a Reverend Samuel Miller that was suggesting that Jefferson should create a national day of prayer and thanksgiving. And Jefferson wrote him a letter back, and in any collection of Jefferson's writing, the letter to Reverend Samuel Miller will be in there. He essentially says, The Constitution says that I may not do that as president. As a matter of fact, we do have, I think, something up on the board there. He says, I do not believe it is in the interest of religion to invite the civil magistrate, that is anybody representing the government, to direct its exercises, that is to say, time to pray. In the end, he says that everyone must act according to the dictates of his own reason, and mine tells me that civil powers alone have been given to the President of the U.S. and no authority to direct the religious exercises of his constituents. So clearly, Jefferson's understanding was, as president, I cannot tell you anything about how you're going to behave religiously. If you're going to pray, I can't suggest that you will pray because there's a lot of power and persuasion and perhaps coercion that comes with my office. That is not my job. That is a clergyman's job, or you do it in your home. But the magistrate, anybody representing the government, that is not his or her job.
But taking that forward to today, and I personally agree with that, and they could have actually written certain things into the Constitution. They could have written the First Amendment differently. They could have put all sorts of language into the Constitution that says this is what we're going to do. But they didn't. And don't we have to go with the documents that we have that are actually the founding documents, rather than the Federalist Papers and all the other papers that were, in some respects, personal viewpoints, in some respects, public relations documents, trying to spin things certain ways and trying to appease certain people outside of the actual founding documents.
The fact that you mentioned, for example, the Federalist Papers, those are important to look at in order to get the meaning, in order to see the reasoning behind it, in order to see what the basis of the compromise was. And of course, Hamilton and Jay and Madison, who are the authors of the Federalist Papers, each one had their own little agenda going on, and but they all liked the compromise, and it was a compromise. The Constitution was a compromise, and they were essentially explaining the value of the Constitution in terms of its being a compromise that will balance off different interests in the country. So that's essential, but it's not a religious document, even though it's an important document for interpretation, understanding the Constitution. But there are other documents that have legal standing in which this is discussed, that they get right to the heart of the matter. The one that I find most intriguing and most important is the one that Thomas Jefferson wrote. It's called the Virginia Act for Establishing Religious Freedom. It was passed by the Virginia legislature in 1786, and it was mainly James Madison who did the backslapping and handshaking and horse trading and log rolling in order to get it done. But Jefferson and Madison were collaborators.
Log rolling?
Log rolling? That's a political science term. It's a technical political science term. But at any rate, the Virginia Act for Establishing Religious Freedom, it goes through step by step, and I have some selections from this that are up on the board. But to give some examples, that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves is sinful and tyrannical.
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 Full religious liberty means protecting each citizen from the tyranny of the majority.
That's a phrase that is used quite often in the Federalist Papers and other similar documents, and it's represented here. So if I say you have to give taxes or pay tithes to support my church, that is sinful and tyrannical. But he goes on to say it is sinful and tyrannical to make you pay to support your own church, because that should be your decision, not anybody else's decision, and certainly not the government's.
Isn't that sort of like freedom? There is no restraint and no compelling reason to do it. Isn't that what freedom actually would mean when we talk about freedom of religion and freedom from religion?
That is what the documents that I'm referring to explicitly state. They go through one after the other. You can't do this because it's abridging freedom. You can't do this because it's abridging freedom. And I would urge anybody to get their copy of Jefferson's writings and look at the Act for Establishing Religious Freedom. But more important to the point that we're talking about, including the commentary, Jefferson wrote about the passage of this bill in the Virginia legislature. And what he said about that is very important, because you have to remember, Jefferson himself was a deist. He was not a practicing Christian as such.
Can you tell us quickly what a deist is?
Yes, there was a philosophy that was current in the Enlightenment, and there were several people. Jefferson was definitely a man of the Enlightenment, as was Ben Franklin, as was Tom Paine, all well known for their writings on deism, as a matter of fact, especially Tom Paine. A deist is one who believes that there was a rational, just God who created the universe. And so rational laws, whether they're laws of physics or laws of ethics, are suffused throughout the universe. But once he created this rational universe, he did not intervene anymore. So he is not the Jewish God or the Christian God or the Muslim God, etc. He is the rational God. Of course, if the universe was created in a rational way, there's no need to keep intervening. So it's
well, why would God need government?
It's not God that needs government. It's men that need government.
We're going to have to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and pick this up. But I want to focus again on what Jefferson is about and go into whether this is truly a secular constitution, why it's done that way, and the meaning of freedom of religion and freedom from religion. A lot of people say, well, it's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. I'm suggesting it's actually both. That's where we're at. And you're watching Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. We'll be right back.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
In these turbulent times, let us not erode the liberties our country was built on.
Let it shine.
Larry Parker, National Honor Society student. Patricia Stevenson, stockbroker. Hector Desario, systems analyst. Driving while black or brown isn't a crime. If it's happened to you, call us at 1-8776-PROFILE and arrest the racism.
Welcome back to Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. You're watching a program sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. Guest here in the studio is Dr. David Schwam-Baird, a political science professor, professor of the Constitution of the United States of America. David, I appreciate you being here as always. And we're talking about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson and his autobiography, and that kind of was revealing a lot. He burned. I understand he disposed of a lot of his writings. Is that true?
That may well have been. There have been, all sorts of things that he had meant to publish that he was working on, and so what's extant in terms of books? He wrote only really one book, Notes on Virginia, and most of the other things that you will read are either the things that he wrote as documents like the Virginia Act for Establishing Religious Freedom or the Declaration of Independence, or letters. Most of this book is letters that he wrote to his compatriots, his colleagues.
He had a fascinating life in a lot of ways, and we could do hours just discussing the life and times of Thomas Jefferson. But I want to try to focus it on whether or not the Constitution is truly a secular document. Was it intended to be a secular document? Did they write language into the Constitution that can be in any way inferred that it's somewhat a religious document? What do you have that can support why we contend that it's a secular document and that it's good that it is, and that there's both freedom of and freedom from religion, and that we're free to practice our religion without interference from the government?
Well, there is one quote that I like from the Notes on Virginia where Jefferson is talking about religious freedom and why people should not be concerned with trying to get other people to act the way that they want to act. And he says that if my neighbor believes in 20 gods or no gods, it is of no concern to me. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. In other words, that's a very elegant way of saying it's not my business and it's not the government's business, et cetera. That was part of his point. But I'd like to go back to his own discussion of the passage of the Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom in Virginia in his autobiography.
Now, when is this in time relative to the Constitution being written?
This is before the Constitution we have now. This was passed in Virginia in 1786.
Oh, not too much before the Constitution.
Not too much before,
right.
but it's in the same time. These are the same people, the same politicians talking about the same issues. So it's not like it's separate, it's marked off, etc. So, and again, it was Thomas Jefferson and James Madison who were involved in the writing and the passage of this act. But Jefferson talks about the bill, and this is what he says.
There it is on the screen. Go ahead, read it. On the screen.
Right. When the Virginia Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom was finally passed, a singular proposition proved that the protection of opinion was meant to be universal. Where the preamble declares that coercion is a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, an amendment was proposed by inserting the word Jesus Christ so that it should read a departure from the plan of Jesus Christ, the holy author of our religion. The insertion was rejected by the great majority in proof that they meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mohammedan, the Hindu and infidel of every denomination. Now, this is also significant.
That's pretty significant. Yeah,
well, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
There's no way you can doubt what Jefferson meant when you read this, but it's also significant because that great majority of the members of the legislature were Christians. Jefferson himself was a deist, but the overwhelming majority of the people in the legislature were Christian, as were most Americans at the time, of course. But the different Christian legislators realized that this was supposed to be absolutely universal. If any one group got in, any one church of Christianity got in and was not restricted from doing these sorts of things, that could be bad for other Christian churches. So the universality is essential, and Christians themselves who wanted their own liberty realized that. Remember, when the Puritans left England, this was a group of Christians that was being persecuted by another group of Christians. When the Quakers left, Quakers are Christians as well, they were being persecuted by the Church of England. So that memory, that experience is very much on the minds of all of these legislators.
Well, we also formed states based on religion in some respects. Is that correct? Or, I mean, like Pennsylvania, and I mean, I don't know if it was based solely on religion, but in those state constitutions, there's a lot more reference to specific religion and specific deity and that type of thing than there is in this new.
That's absolutely true. But that's part of the problem, because before the Constitution of 1789, the one we use today, a majority, I believe, of the colonies, of the states, had laws that said, for example, and it was usually this three groups: Quakers, Catholics, and Jews were not allowed to serve in the legislature or serve in elected office or hold certain kinds of jobs. That is to say, there were several states that had explicit restrictions based on religious discrimination as to who could be in. Another thing to point out is that one of the many things that concerned James Madison, and the reason that he was such a firm advocate and crusader practically for separation of church and state, was that among the other groups that he was watching or helping out, there was a group of Baptists who were in jail in New Jersey because they refused to pay the tithe that the colony state of New Jersey levied on all of its citizens to support the Anglican Church, the Church of England, which at the time, before the Constitution, was the official Church of New Jersey. So Baptists, I mean, of course, yes, they don't want to pay tithes for another church. So they were in jail, and Madison said, this is preposterous. We're supposed to be about religious freedom. This is what happens when you don't have separation of church and state. And when Jefferson talks about the wall of separation in his letter to the Danbury Baptists.
That's where that phrase comes from.
That's where it comes from. A lot of people who are trying to say, no, Jefferson didn't mean it, or no, Jefferson wasn't a strong advocate, et cetera, they say, oh, well, that's the only time he mentioned it, and he didn't really mean that, and he really meant that government can't interfere with religion, which is what he meant, but he didn't say anything about religion getting involved in government. No. He meant that too. And if you look at all the other documents,
freedom of, freedom from.
Freedom of, freedom from.
Right.
It is in Jefferson's writings, in Madison's writings, in Tom Paine's writings. It is so explicit. You can't miss it unless you're sleeping while
Okay,
you're reading.
we're done. We can go home. All right, we fixed that problem.
Yes, okay.
Very
Zip
good.
through that. But,
I think it bears repeating probably once a month or, you know, every, I don't know.
Well,
Why is it such an issue? How do you interpret that from your, now I'm not asking you to be so much a scholar as somebody offering commentary.
It's a very strange thing, but you know, I am a professor of political science, not actually a professor of the Constitution, but I do teach Thomas Jefferson, I do teach the Founding Fathers when I teach political philosophy courses. I do teach courses from time to time on American politics, and I now teach it by the Constitution. But one of the reasons you need a Constitution, one of the reasons it's so important to understand what it's trying to lay out and that it is a compromise, and as a compromise it's supposed to serve everybody and protect everybody equally and not give any one group an advantage over another, is because in history, in politics, people very, very quickly forget the lessons that experience taught
the past.
them before.
Yes.
Exactly.
We need to be reminded constantly. I mean, advertisers have figured this out. They the same commercial over and over and over ad nauseum because we are very forgetful. So forgetful, we go to war all the time over
we
issues.
Haven't figured that out either.
Right, we haven't figured that out. But in terms of this, we have to be more vigilant in teaching what it means to be a constitution. One of the things I think, and I think you agree with this, is that we don't teach it soon enough in our public school systems in America, or often enough.
Or profoundly enough.
Or profoundly
is what I
enough.
would really say.
Okay.
Because there are ways to teach it. You can teach it, memorize Article 1, memorize Article 2. I'm not necessarily sure that that's not a bad idea. It would be nice to memorize it. I don't have the Constitution memorized. But you have to discuss it. You have to say, this is what happens. This is what it's trying to protect. This is why it's there, because the British did this or the colonists had
Put it
this
in
experience.
historical perspective as
Put
to
it in
the
historical
time of what they were
and
going through.
contemporary perspective, both. You have
You think
to
it was a
have both.
visionary document?
I think it was a visionary document. One of the most interesting visionary things about the document is the document included rules about how to amend the document. Jefferson and Tom Paine, they had a very interesting theory about tradition and the hold of tradition on people. And they said everybody in every generation has the right to rethink their situation, to rethink their laws. They didn't advocate rejecting all laws, etc. But they said, we can't tell what the needs of the next generation are going to be on very specific things. On the other hand, we can anticipate what a lot of the problems will be, and so we are trying to make the compromise now that will be supple enough to be a basis for keeping the country together, keeping these various groups together, keeping them from each other's throats, keeping them in a position where they can cooperate, and yet we know we couldn't figure everything out, and so here are the rules. You can change this Constitution.
200 years, we've amended it 27 times. There's talk about a 28th amendment. I don't know what that might be. I'm hopeful it won't be the same-sex marriage amendment. I don't think there's any benefit in terms of equality. We're out of time. David, thank you very much for being my guest. I want to thank everybody for watching Civil Discourse, program sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union. To call your attention to this movie, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, that's coming to San Marco Theater on Sunday, May 15th. If you're an activist in Jacksonville, if you want to seek effective social change, political or otherwise, this is a movie for you. It's very inspirational, very motivational. The proceeds go to benefit Wage Peace, San Marco Theater, Sunday, May 15th at 1 p.m. Thank you. We'll see you next time. You have been watching a public access television program called Civil Discourse, sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. The ACLU is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. Our mission is to protect and advance the civil liberties and civil rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution, especially the principles contained in the Bill of Rights. We want to hear from you. Send us an email, share your views and opinions. If you're interested in appearing on the program, let us know. Friend or foe, we want you on the show. You may contact the ACLU in the following ways. Our telephone number is 904-396-5242. Our post office box is 5331 Jacksonville, Florida 32247. And our email address is aclujax@yahoo.com. My name is Ken Hurley. Thank you for participating in Civil Discourse.